In this video, we're going to talk about Likert type scales. Likert type scales are used to measure complex psychological constructs. And first, we're going to kind of define a Likert type scale, and then we're going to go over an example on self-esteem. If you remember from the research methods phase, a construct is a complex characteristic that varies from person to person. So for example, a construct would be your motivation, or your emotions, or maybe your self-esteem. These are complex things that are hard to measure, and they can be measured in a multitude of ways. An example of something that is not a construct is your weight. So there's only really one way to measure weight. You can measure it in grams or pounds, but really you can convert them to each other. So you're really just measuring them in one way. You know, there's not like a multitude of questions that you can ask. Or how old you are is another thing that's not very complex. You can measure in years or seconds, but they convert to each other. So when we are measuring a construct in psychology, we generally use scales. And a scale is a group of items that measure one construct. So because this construct is so complex, we think that having multiple items is better than having just one item, because we think we're going to have a better chance of actually measuring that construct than if we just have one item. So we use a scale, which is a group of items for one construct. And we use multiple items for a construct because it's hard to measure generally, and we think it's more reliable to have more items than just one item for a construct. A Likert type scale is a scale with response options such as strongly, disagree, neither agree, or disagree, agree, or strongly agree, or something similar to those. They don't have to be exactly that, but something similar to that. So they're generally for things that are opinions or attitudes. And you ask someone, how much do you agree or disagree to this following statement? So for example, if you're measuring self-esteem, this statement could be, I am a person of worth. And you ask that person to indicate how much they agree or disagree with that statement, and they use these response options that I just previously listed. And then what you do is you give numbers to the response option. So you could give 1 strongly disagree and 5 strongly agree, and then the numbers in between. So 2 would be disagree, 3 would be neither agree or disagree, and 4 would be agree. And then what we would do is average out the numbers on those items to get one score for each person. So if you have, say, 10 items for self-esteem, you want to get what's called a composite score and average out those items to get a single score for each person. So you would average out all those 10 items for self-esteem to get one score. And we can do this because we assume that these response options create a scale variable. Now it's debatable if this is a scale variable or not. To be a scale variable, the categories need to be equally spaced. And some people say they're not really, and some people say they are. So in psychology, you generally treat this as a scale variable, but some people might disagree and want to treat this as categorical. Now, because it's scale, we can average these categories out. So, you know, we're giving numbers to these categories, and then we're treating it as scale. So sometimes you don't want to give numbers to categories. For example, gender. We could give numbers to males and females. We could give male 1 and a female 2, or we could give the female the 1 or the male and then the male the 2. But that doesn't really mean much because the order that we put them in is kind of arbitrary. But in this case, they're ordered, and we're kind of assuming that they're equally spaced from each other. So, we're not like going from strongly disagree to agree and then strongly agree. Like, that wouldn't make any sense because so if you only had 3 categories, strongly disagree, agree, and strongly agree, that wouldn't be equally spaced because the distance between strongly disagree and agree is different than the difference between agree and strongly agree. Anyways, just remember that we treat Likert type scales in psychology as scale variables and not categorical. That's all you need to take away from that. And part of the reason we do this is because in inferential statistics, it's generally more powerful if we conduct statistics on scale variables than on categorical variables. It makes things just easier if we can treat it as a scale variable than a categorical variable when we do inferential statistics. We're going to go over an example on self-esteem. Self-esteem is a complex psychological construct. It is defined as a person's sense of personal value or their self-worth. And Rosenberg in 1965 created a 10-item Likert type scale. Here we have his scale, his 10-item scale. And you can see in the first column we have all the items. There's 10 of them. And then the other columns are the strongly disagree, agree, and strongly agree. So this data is from the National Longitudinal Youth Survey. And for some reason they didn't have the middle category. But that's okay. So we're only going to have 4 categories in this example instead of 5. And so what we do is we're going to have the person indicate how much they agree with each of these items. So say they have really strong self-esteem. So someone that's really high in self-esteem is going to read this and say, I am a person of worth. I strongly agree with that. So they're going to pick strongly agree. I have a number of good qualities. I strongly agree with that. I am inclined to feel that I am a failure. They're going to say they strongly disagree with that because that's kind of saying I have bad self-esteem. It's the reverse. And then you're going to keep going. So I'm capable. I do not feel I have much to be proud of. Have a positive attitude. I am satisfied with myself. I wish I had more self-respect. No. I feel useless at times. No. I sometimes think I'm no good at all. No, I wouldn't do that. So someone with really high self-esteem would have a response pattern like this. But most people wouldn't be so extreme. But that would be extreme. And then people who have like hardly any self-esteem would have the opposite of this, okay? So to score someone's self-esteem, we're going to have to give them numbers. So we're going to give strongly disagree on 1. And these are going to be consecutive whole numbers. And then disagree 2, agree 3, and strongly agree 4. So the higher the number, the more self-esteem that they have. And so that works for number 1. So I'm a person of worth. We're going to give that person a 4 because they really agreed with it. And I have a number of good qualities. That works too. But when we get to I am inclined to feel that I am a failure, that doesn't really work to give them a 1 because if they really disagree with this statement, then that really means they have high self-esteem. So that doesn't really work. So this is what's called a reverse scored item. And there's actually a couple of them, or more than a couple in here. So this one is this one, this one, this one, and this one. So all of these, the ones that we said someone who has high self-esteem would strongly disagree with, would be what are called reversed scored items. And so they're going to have to get a different scoring scheme to make everything consistent. So for those items, we're going to give a strongly disagree a number 4, a disagree a number 3, an agree a 2, and a strongly agree a 1. So the reverse scored items are going to be scored a little differently, because if they agree with that item, it really means that they don't have very high self-esteem, and if they strongly disagree with those reverse scored items, then that means they really do have high self-esteem. A composite score is an average or total of all items on that particular scale. I prefer to use average, but total is okay too. But I think average makes more sense because it's kind of back on the scale that you're already using for the individual items. So here I'm going to have an example. I have 2 people, so person 1 is in this row with the ID 1, person 2 is in this row with the ID 2. And then I just use 5 of the items from the self-esteem scale. I didn't have all 10 just for this example to make it a little bit more simple. So generally when you download data from whatever survey website you're using, such as SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, you can download the data with numbers. So these numbers actually mean the response options that they used. But the problem is, usually when you download these, the computer or the website doesn't distinguish from reverse code items and non-reverse coded items. So they just give a 1 if they strongly disagree and a 4 if they strongly agree. So they just start with the first category, give it a 1, and keep counting. And so this data is not all the way right. So this one's okay. So this means this was not a reverse coded item and they disagreed. So number 2 would be disagree, since 1 is strongly disagree. And this is the second item, which is in the positive way, and it means that they strongly disagreed with that item. But this one is a reverse coded item, the number 3. And so the website doesn't know that this is a reverse coded item. So you have to do it manually. I'm going to show you how to do it pretty simply just with these 2 people, and then in another video for your homework I'll show you how to do it with a lot of people. So remember, it's kind of reversed. So a 3 should now be a 2. So instead of putting a 3 here, we put a 2. So we kind of flip the scale. So a 1 becomes a 4, a 2 becomes a 3 becomes a 2, and a 4 becomes a 1. And this one's fine, but this one's not okay. So instead of a 2, we want a 3 here. And these are fine, but this one again, we need to reverse code it and make it a 1. And then 5 is also wrong. So these people actually had pretty low self-esteem if you finally reverse code the items that need to be reverse coded. So after you reverse code the items that need to be recoded, Now, if that didn't make sense, you might want to go back a little bit in the video and see why I did that. And then you want to get the average. So we're going to average for each person. So average here. And then I'm just going to highlight their 5 responses and get the average. So their average is a 2. So they had pretty low self-esteem according to this scale. And then we're going to do the average for person 2. And their average is a 1.4. So they had an even lower score than person 1. So again, websites that you usually don't know which are reverse coded, and so you have to manually go in and change those. And for the homework, I'll show you how to do it in a faster way when you have a lot of people and not just 2. One final note, generally Likert type scales have an odd number response options, unlike our data from the National Longitudinal Youth Survey. And the reason it's an odd number is because in the middle we have a neutral option, such as neither agree or disagree. So this example is a little different than what it normally is, but it's still a good example.